Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for.
Everybody, I'm back. Good to be back. So tell you what, we did the full episode of the Aaron Torres pod on Sunday night. We talked about essentially 5 different coaching changes in the SEC. Lane Kiffin to LSU, Pete Golding takes over for him at Ole Miss, Arkansas, Florida, Auburn, all have new head coaches, okay? And so I get off air Sunday. I'm finished kind of doing the post-show stuff. Producer Matt's working on a few things. And apparently the SEC coaching carousel was not done, okay? Mark Stoops, hours after we got off air, we probably got off air about 8:30 or so Eastern time on Sunday. What about 10 p.m. Eastern? Mark Stoops officially fired as the Kentucky football coach. By the way, quickly, I want to apologize that we kind of weren't able to get to that right away. Sunday night, I'd promised the wife we're going to put up the Christmas tree. We're going to watch Home Alone. So I apologize for the delay. I want to spend just a few minutes talking about Mark Stoops and his legacy. But then, listen, we're 24 hours removed, and I think Kentucky fans want to know who's next. And to me, there is one very obvious name that you have to get, and about 1 or 2 others that I think you got to at least consider. And I'll also say this, is that considering the timing, don't think that the candidate pool for Kentucky is maybe necessarily as bad as an outsider might think. But let's go ahead and dive in. The Mark Stoops stuff, I'll say this, is I have been very critical of Mark Stoops this season. And it's been just an interesting journey, right? Season starts, there's quote-unquote motivated Mark Stoops. Everybody's starting to believe, starting to buy in. You struggle out of the gate. You lose to Ole Miss in the SEC opener, in which there's clock mismanagement and timeout mismanagement and whatever, right? And so I bring it up because that kind of starts this negative cascade. And when I say negative, I'm not criticizing Kentucky fans. I think everybody was fair about the state of the program. Then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, you put in Cutter Boley. You start to figure some things out. You should have beat Texas, if we're being perfectly honest. You do beat Auburn in what ended up being Hugh Freeze's final game. You beat Florida, and all of a sudden you sit there and you're like, oh, there's some real momentum here, and I'll call a spade a spade. You have the 3-game winning streak, including the FCS opponent. I was one that said Mark Stoops is coming back next year, and I'll go ahead and give credit to Kentucky fans. Kentucky fans said, we need to see what happens before we need to see what happens in the final 2 games before we make any final decisions. If you remember, the final 2 were Vanderbilt on the road, Louisville on the road. And essentially, I think every Kentucky fan said, listen, I don't want to speak for every Kentucky fan, but I think most Kentucky fans sat there and said, look, we go 1-1. We get to another bowl game. He has earned another, an opportunity for another year. But if we go 0-2, I don't want to hear this crap. 5-7, losses to Louisville, losses to Vanderbilt. I don't want to hear it, okay? And so I give Kentucky fans credit because I was one that thought after the 3-game winning streak, oh, this dude is coming back. And instead, you not only lose the last 2, you largely lose the last 2 in embarrassing fashion, right? Vandy just punks you. Vandy just bullies you. There's all sorts of records set that day in terms of offensive performance, and Diego Pavia does this. Then you go to Louisville, and Louisville punks you. Miller Moss comes back, 41-0 final score. And I'll be real. I'm just going to be 100% honest, is I thought coming out of Saturday, as bad as it was, 5-7 with all of these jobs, and really, frankly, the late start to it all, right? All these schools are finalizing coaching hires. Kentucky is the exact opposite. They're not even started yet. I thought, whatever, Mark Stoops is going to get another year, and we're going to be in the same situation next year. By the way, you know who else thought that? Mark Stoops. I saw his statements at the press conference on Saturday of, I'm 100% not going anywhere. I'm on 100% not quitting. And so for this all to come together as quickly as it did, I just give Kentucky fans credit because they said, we need to see the last 2 games. We're not going to get too high. We're not going to get too low. We need to see what this looks like before we commit to this guy for another year. So all of a sudden you get into Sunday, I start seeing Matt Jones tweeting stuff about, there's meetings and there's this and there's that. and you think it's going to happen. And then, like I said, what was it, about 10:15, 10:20 Eastern time, Mark Stoops is officially let go at the University of Kentucky. So I want to dive into what's next. Before I do, though, I want to spend half a second just contextualizing what this guy meant to Kentucky. And I know we got Kentucky fans from all over the state joining us. And so I'm not going to sit here and say I know the program better than you. But what I will say is I do think I know the importance of Mark Stoops, what he brought to this program, and frankly, like what the program was before he got to Kentucky and where it was at its peak, right? We can all, I think two things in this whole situation can be true. One, it was 100% time for Mark Stoops to go, okay? At the same time, though, we can't deny this was the worst program in the SEC when he took over. And frankly, in this modern era, took the program to unprecedented heights, right? You go back and you look at where this program was and what they were accomplishing at the height of what they were doing. It was pretty impressive. 8 straight bowl games, multiple 10-win seasons, all sorts of draft picks with Josh Allen, not that Josh Allen, the other Josh Allen, Will Levis, Lynn Bowden, Wan'Dale Robinson. At their peak, this program was awesome. It was fun, and you got to give Mark Stoops credit. By the way, I was even surprised looking at this morning. Like, I knew he had beaten Florida a bunch. 5 out of the last 8 years, he beat Florida. He finishes this season with a win over Florida. So this guy finishes with an amazing resume. At the same time, it was time to move on. I give two parties credit. One, I give him credit, right? You can talk about how bad it got, how ugly it was, how this it was, how that it was. Let's not forget, he had a $39 million buyout that was owed within 60 days. And I think, to me, a sign that, one, for whatever reason, whether it was selfish or unselfish, I think he was smart to say, I'm just going to go ahead and we'll change the buyout structure. I'm going to get all my money. Don't get me wrong. But instead of being owed within 60 days, let's do it over multiple years. And I think that was smart by Mark Stoops. And I think, to me, it signaled two things. One, I just think he knew his time was over. I have to imagine that while he was surprised, there was probably a sense of relief for Mark Stoops that maybe it was just time for me to do something else. But I think it's also smart because it preserves his legacy at the University of Kentucky, right? You sit there and you look at the fact that, I've said it all year. I do believe that one day there will be a statue of Mark Stoops outside of Kroger Field. And I think there should be. I think what he did at that school was absolutely incredible. And I think we should we being Kentucky fans, again, I'm not trying to speak for Kentucky fans, celebrate the guy, appreciate what he did. And I do think there's something to, if you demand all $39 million within 60 days, and if it gets ugly, all of a sudden that legacy that you spent 12, 13 years building up, it's all gone in the snap of a finger because you basically just bankrupted the athletic department. So I give Mark Stoops credit for coming to his senses. I give credit to Kentucky fans. I think once the initial frustration of the Louisville loss kind of subsided, and once this news was official and you realize he's not coming back, I saw a lot of appreciation, a lot of gratitude for what Mark Stoops did. And so now everybody's moving on. It feels like, to me, with clean hands and fresh eyes, Mark Stoops gets to go do whatever the next chapter of his career is. As I'm recording here, there has not been a press conference, so I don't know exactly what the buyout structure is, if he needs to look for other jobs, if he ever wants to coach again. All those things will be addressed. But I just thought, considering how ugly the on-the-field product was, considering how contentious the product was, the press conference was on Saturday, I thought it could have been much uglier. I give both sides credit for figuring out a way to get this done in a calm manner. Now, with that said, that's the Mark Stoops part of it. Let's go ahead and talk about what's next. Before we do, I should mention, by the way, I've said it all year, but Kentucky fans, it's that time of year. Football is now sort of over. You're overlapping with basketball. You need places to watch all of these big games. Well, guess what? Check out Circa Casino, Mint Kentucky Downs at Franklin, Kentucky. Okay, so I've told you all about it. I'm in Vegas a lot. I was in Vegas last week for the Players Era Championship. And I just bring it up because when I was there, the best place to watch all of the games if you were not in the arena was the Circa Sportsbook at Circa Casino. And I also understand that not all of you can get to Vegas. So if you're on the East Coast, Mint Kentucky Downs, the Mint, Franklin, Kentucky, best place to watch all these big games. You don't need a bunch of apps. You don't need SEC plus, 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 exclamation point, whatever. All you got to do is check out the Mint Circa Sportsbook, the Circa Sportsbook at the Mint, Franklin, Kentucky. By the way, I'll actually be there next week. So I got to go up to Nashville next weekend, the weekend of the Indiana basketball game. I'm going to swing by the Mint on Thursday and just see what it's all about. We'll be doing a live show there in the lead up to March Madness, probably late February, early March. So Circa Sportsbook, Mint Kentucky Downs. If you go there, do me a favor. Tag Circa Sports, tag the Mint, or at least tag Circa Sports. Tag Aaron_Torres. Let him know that I sent you there. But Circa Sportsbook, Mint Kentucky Downs. I will be reporting back from the Mint in the next couple days. In the meantime, make sure to check it out for yourself. All right, with that said, let's go ahead and switch gears and let's talk about what's next. And it's really interesting to kind of see this from the national versus local perspective, because I do think on the national scale, I think everybody looked around and said, wait a second now. Auburn just hired a coach. LSU just hired a coach. Ole Miss just promoted somebody. Arkansas and Florida all hired coaches on Sunday, excuse me. And Kentucky's just now getting into the fray. What are they doing? It's a complete mess. And what I would say is, we can argue if it's a mess, if it's not a mess. I don't think Kentucky was really swimming from the same pool of candidates as any of those schools, really. Transparently, I don't mean to be a negative Nancy. I don't even think I don't think John Summerall, if the Kentucky job had opened 2 weeks ago, I don't think it's more likely that John Summerall ends up as the Kentucky coach as opposed to the Florida coach. I think, he was going to go to Florida or Auburn probably ahead of Kentucky. But I bring it up because considering you're entering the fray here so late, I'll say this. I actually think there are some really, 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 really intriguing candidates that are worth looking at for Kentucky. And I think some of them are already emerging. By the way, I think there's a few candidates that are not emerging as well. We'll get into those. In terms of who's next. So the first name, listen, it's the obvious one. If you're a Kentucky fan, maybe on a national scale, you're not as familiar with the ties. It is Will Stein, the offensive coordinator of the Oregon Ducks. And again, this is a guy that maybe wasn't a candidate at some of these other places, but I only bring it up because he is the perfect candidate for Kentucky. First of all, forget everything else. The bottom line is, after watching 14 years of Mark Stoops football, if you're a Kentucky fan, you got to be sitting there saying, just give me a dude who wants to throw the ball. Give me a dude with a dynamic offense. Let's move the ball all over the field. Let's go have a day, have some fun, and put some points on the board, right? So you have that going for you. Oregon, certainly an elite offense, the entire time that he has been there. And also for people who don't know why Will Stein, it's the local ties. He is a Louisville native. He actually, this is kind of crazy to me. Maybe it isn't to Kentucky fans. He actually went to the same high school as Jeff Brom. So you talk about things being tied in pretty tightly in the state of Kentucky. That's a pretty big tie-in right there. But went to the same high school as Jeff Brom. He's from Louisville. And the other thing is, and I've said this about most of these jobs, give me the young guy every day of the week over the old established guy, right? And the reason why is, look, there's old guys doing it at a really high level, and old is relative. Nobody 90 or 100, but there are old guys that have figured out this NIL portal era. But I do think increasingly college sports is becoming a young man's game. And I think more importantly, you have to have coaches that understand that this is just where we are. And I think we're finally past the era of everybody just whining about it. And at a certain point, the coaches that don't want to deal with NIL in the portal, on the football side, Nick Saban, on the basketball side, Coach K, Roy Williams, whatever, those guys are mostly out of the game. And the people that are still in it either have accepted this is what it is, and I'll figure out a way to make it work out. Tom Izzo is one that's coming to mind in that case. Or go young and just say, this is what it is. This is how we have to build. This is how we deal with it. And I think in a place like Kentucky, it's actually an advantage. Because now, all of a sudden, you get the right coach with the right staff, you can create a place where, hey, you don't have to be the third string offensive tackle at Ohio State or Penn State or Tennessee or Georgia, and you can get good players that you frankly probably couldn't have gotten several years ago. And you can not only do that, but you can also do it, by the way. You can do it. I think in some ways it'll be easier to recruit guys because you got the dynamic offense in place. Okay. So to me, I think all of that, Will Stein checks all the boxes. Okay. Listen, we're recording here. It's about 1:30, 2 o'clock Eastern time. I know some of you won't see it until later. Maybe there will be movement. I don't know how quickly this could come together. Oregon does not play this week, which is kind of an interesting caveat. A lot of these candidates at these jobs that are still open do play this week. So I just bring it up because maybe something comes together Monday, maybe something comes together Tuesday. I don't know, but I do think it's really interesting. The other guy on the younger side that I love for this candidate pool is Brian Hartline, the OC at Ohio State. Now, listen, Ohio State is a different beast, right? They at a different level, but he has been in that machine, much like Will Stein, by the way. Will Stein has been in the Oregon machine. He has seen up close and in person how Dan Lanning recruits, how Dan Lanning builds a staff, how Dan Lanning builds a program. I'll tell Kentucky fans, I'll tell you a quick side story. I remember when Dan Lanning, probably like year 2, year 3, I remember talking to Justin Hopkins, who's like the number one Oregon beat writer guy. And he said, look, man, I was here for the Mario Cristobal era, and I thought I would never see a recruiting machine like that again. He goes, but Lanning is just different, dude. He's got the plan for the, high school seniors and high school juniors. And what are we going to do with JUCOs? And what about, portal kids that are coming in right away? And what about developmental portal kids? And he's got 20 different boards. That would have me excited if I was a Kentucky fan, right? So you have that. Brian Hartline's much the same. Young guy, OC from that area. And obviously, like, Brian Hartline's recruiting is just like, goodness, man. I mean, you watch the NFL. I mean, remember, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Marvin Harrison, Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Jamison Williams, who didn't finish at Ohio State, but all these guys are Ohio State guys. And he keeps pumping them out. And he comes from another place where they've recruited at the highest level. That would have me excited. Again, young and understands the dynamics at play here in the world of college football. The other thing I'll say about Brian Hartline, and I would tell you, is that, I said this at one point during the Penn State search. I had been told by very credible sources that Brian Hartline, I still think he's kind of a candidate at Penn State. Now, by the time you hear this, maybe he won't be. But I bring it up because part of what Brian Hartline was selling was, hey, you hire me, some of these second-tier guys at Ohio State that aren't going to see the field, they might be willing to come with me. And I don't think he ever has given out specific names. And I know, ironically, of all things, quarterback isn't necessarily a priority at Kentucky. But like, as an example, Ohio State's backup quarterback is a player by the name of Tavian St. Clair, 5-star, top 5 prospect in the last high school recruiting class. Well, remember, he needs to wait another year to get on the field at Ohio State because Julian Sand just put together a Heisman Trophy caliber season. So if Tavian St. Clair wants to play right away, maybe he follows the guy that he's super comfortable with in Brian Hartline. Quincy Porter, 5-star receiver in last year's class. Didn't see the field very much this year because look who was ahead of him. Jeremiah Smith, the best receiver in America. Carnell Tate, maybe the second best receiver in America. Would that guy be willing to go, especially knowing that Jeremiah Smith, is coming back? So to me, those are the two names. Those are the obvious names. A couple names that I don't think are real candidates. I saw Mike Florio kind of pushing the name of Chip Kelly. I don't see it. First of all, Florio, whatever, like, I'm not trusting him on college stories. He's getting his information from NFL people, whether it's Chip Kelly himself or Chip Kelly's agent. And maybe Chip Kelly is interested in the Kentucky job. I just don't know that vice versa. Kentucky should or is interested in him. I've seen it said everywhere, and it's true. This was a guy that checked out on the NIL portal world. He's kind of the guy that I was just talking about of, the less accomplished Roy Williams or less accomplished Coach K or Jay Wright that just said, I don't want to deal with this portal stuff. So he goes to Ohio State. He has success as an OC, goes to the NFL. It doesn't feel like a fit. I've seen a little Dan Mullen buzz. Dan Mullen was linked early to the Arkansas job, and he did a very adamant press conference in which he said, I'm sorry, I'm checking my phone here, just making sure I'm not missing anything. He did a very adamant press conference where he's like, I'm at Arkansas, or I'm at UNLV. I'm not leaving UNLV. I'm going to be your coach next year. And he literally said it in the press conference. Do you want me to say I will be here next year at UNLV? Well, I'm saying it. I will be here next year at UNLV. So I just don't buy that Dan Mullen probably is the guy there. But I do think Brian Hartline's for real, and I certainly think Will Stein is for real, hoping that there isn't too much movement before you see this, but we will see what happens. Kentucky, to me, you're sad that the Mark Stoops era is over, but I think everybody is excited about what's next, and you should be, because I think I think whoever you get is going to be a surprisingly good hire.